Welcome, everyone. This is the Vanguard's ongoing series of webinars. And today we have a great panel of people that are going to be talking about housing in Davis, which is always an interesting topic. So our panelist includes Davis's Mayor, Gloria Partida, and Georgina Valencia, who is on the Social Services Commission, and you're also on the Housing Element Subcommittee.
Yes.
As is Don Gibson, a recent PhD from UC Davis. Larry Guenther and Kelsey Fortune are both recent candidates for the City Council. So we have a great panel here. And we're really going to be talking today a bit about housing in general, but also about the housing element. And what I want to briefly mention here is what the housing element actually is, because right now we have a requirement that over the next 8 years of 2,000 market rate units, including 900 units of affordable housing. And so I got this explanation of what the housing element actually requires. So according to Ash Feeney, who's the assistant city manager and also the director of community development, we have to identify that we have available land zone to accommodate the RENA allocation. To the extent we do not have enough land to meet that allocation, we need to identify sites that could be rezoned to meet the need and move ahead with rezoning as an implementation measure of the housing element. We can identify sites that existing use with existing uses on them, but they need to have a good probability for conversion during the cycle period. So one of the things that I quickly noticed as I started looking at a map is where the heck are we going to put 2,000 units of housing in Davis? Because we have been building a fair number of infill developments, a lot of those student housing and apartment complexes, but there's not a lot of vacant land available within the city. Of course, anything outside of the current city limits is requires a measure RJD vote, which, as anyone who's paid any attention to, recent political history in Davis knows that that's kind of a crapshoot. We've had 2 projects approved, but 4 projects not approved. And then finally, the idea of redevelopment, which is going to really come into play when we approve the Davis downtown plan. That's really expensive, and so there are questions as to whether or not we're going to have the resources to be able to do that kind of redevelopment. So that led me to decide that we needed to have kind of a broader discussion of basically what kind of housing does Davis need? Where should it put the housing? And how can we get more affordable housing? So I'm going to start with, the basic question of what kind of housing do we need? So I'm not going to do this formally. So anyone who wants to answer these questions can kind of jump in and give their thoughts. And at some point, we're going to start bringing in audience questions as well. So who wants to start out here?
So your question is, what kind of housing do we need?
Correct.
Well, I'll be happy to jump in unless you're ready, Gloria.
Go ahead, Georgina.
I think there's a couple of different ways to look at this when you're talking about housing types. First, there's, who is the population that you want to serve with the housing types, demographics. Demographics such as, teachers, nurses, Junior faculty, UC Davis, students, maybe PhD students. So, demographics is one part of it. Who aren't we serving? Who do we need to serve? Another piece of it is, if we're building housing and the majority of the housing is rental housing, are we leaving some of our populations out? So I would say that the type of housing we need is also, besides rental housing, besides market rate for sale housing, is we need affordable, whether deed restricted or non-deed restricted, affordable housing. So we can help populations that normally wouldn't have an opportunity to buy in this market with a median price of a home of almost, well, $680,000. I think that's another type of housing we need to think about for sure. And then I think architectural variation to fit the different needs. Small housing certainly is going to be more affordable than, say, a 2,500 or a 3,000 square foot home. But how can you actually build that housing and affordably do it? So, architectural variations. Density is another way to support more affordable type construction. So therefore the housing prices would be more affordable. What else? We're talking a lot today about auxiliary dwelling units or grandmother flats. I think that's another approach. They're definitely not a for sale type housing. It would be rental housing, but it certainly is another method to get housing built. You're not going to solve the problem with ADUs, but you will get some more housing. And then I think, truly thinking again about smaller housing types. I'll leave it there so everybody else can jump in.
Thank you. I have to agree completely with Georgina that we definitely need a wide variety of types of housing. I think that, we kind of go in these phases where we, build nothing, and we saw a lot of student units get approved. And because that was what the need was at the time. And so I think that what we need definitely changes. But I think that right now we have to think about, where we are going to go in the future, and what we want our demographics to be in the future, because right now we are definitely skewing towards a lot of older people and a lot of younger people in the community. And we have squeezed out a lot of our middle income people and a lot of our young families. We have to think about housing, in my mind, goes together with economic development. And so if we don't have anywhere for people to live when they work in Davis, that's a problem. So if we want to increase the economic development opportunities in Davis, we have to also increase the housing that goes along with those economic development opportunities. And that's going to be a lot of younger people. It's going to be a lot of people who have just graduated from UC Davis, who are just starting families. And so we have to think about those groups. And I think that those groups of people definitely are going to want starter homes. They're going to want, condominiums. They're going to want infill. They're going to want to be close to the places that they live. So definitely looking at a wide variety, trying to stay as compact as we can is going to be important.
I really want to jump in here because I think Mayor Partida hit up something that's really personal to me about this. I actually haven't lived in Davis since 2010. I was affiliated with the university the entire time, and I actually still work in Davis at a life science startup. And I was fortunate enough to be able to have a small nest egg to buy a home in South Natomas. But because Davis price range is $300,000 to $400,000 more than a starter home just a few miles down the road, I've been a part of the Davis community, but just wasn't able to afford to do the next steps. Now my partner of mine, we're both in our 30s. She's an attorney. I'm starting a career as a scientist. We're ready to have a family if a child comes along the way, but looking to come to Davis is just far beyond our price range, even as middle-class professionals ready to start a family. And so without a significant increase in housing in 20 years, it's led to myself and thousands, if not tens of thousands of people who commute to Davis, who feel part of the community, still enjoy going to a farmer's market and stuff downtown when it was all safe to do and regular to do, but not actually live there. So, I made a lot of greenhouse gases sitting on I-80, and I wish I had a bigger nest egg to have got in, but I still have roommates. It's kind of a generational wealth thing we kind of have here. So if you don't have the access to get a home ownership or wealth, or you have a very high income job by the age of 35, 40, you're probably not going to come back to Davis.
Larry or Kelsey, you want to jump in?
I'll jump in, I guess, or go ahead, Kelsey.
Yeah, I think there are two things that we really need to kind of consider when we're thinking about housing, and that's that one, we have a growing university in our community, and that university makes our community what it is. Davis would not exist as we know it without UC Davis. And so when we're talking about, say, student housing being the main focus of a lot of development, I think there's some animosity that comes with that we need to rethink. Housing our students in our community means that they spend their time here and they spend their money here, and they don't have to drive to school every day. They can bike or take the bus or walk. And we want people to be housed near where they work and where they want to be, because like Dawn said, when you push people out of the community, you're not only, creating a subpar living situation for them, right? Something that they would rather be somewhere else. You're creating a lot of greenhouse gases, and you're creating congestion. And there are all of these other things that come with housing people where they want to be. If people live outside the community where they want to be, they also don't spend their money in that community. I think, with the downtown housing plan, putting people actually living in the downtown core is going to be incredibly important for those small businesses there. If I lived on a pedestrian and public transit only street in Madison, Wisconsin, and I lived right above a cafe, and let me tell you, I was there all the time. And it was great. And I loved having all of this at my fingertips. And I would never have needed a car because everything was right there. And that's what we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about housing, not just from the people side of things, but from the environmental side of things. We need to be considering climate when we're thinking about our decision to house people close to where they want to actually be.
All right.
So, three things. So when we say university, and we are a university town, I don't think anybody denies that. They're certainly the #1 employer. But when we think university, the conversation is often totally dominated, almost sometimes exclusively, to students. But according to the UC Davis website, the population on campus is actually half students, half staff and faculty. Half, right? So it's non-trivial. Additionally, the young families are the missing and shrinking demographic in this city. And then workforce, wage earner type people. I mean, we've got some lowercase a affordable housing in our neighborhood, and we've got people that work in fast food downtown in our neighborhood, but there is not a lot of opportunity for those people. So we need housing for all those people and for students. The thing is, and I was a student for a very long time, far longer than I probably should have been, but students are actually a very flexible rental group. So they can rent houses or apartments, single room apartments, multi-room apartments. So really mixing it up into a lot of multifamily, multiplexes. I can't remember who, Georgina was talking about, and one of the questions in the chat was multiplexes and ADUs. So actually, Gloria, you said something really interesting on the discussion about the University Commons project. You said to house that many people with ADUs, you'd have to go all the way from there to Covell. And I was like, great. I mean, it's more spread out than obviously everybody in one thing, but it serves a different need. And you know, an ADU doubles the occupancy of that site. So I think they are actually a really good tool in the tool chest for trying to fix that problem and trying to add more housing without the blunt force trauma effect. So riding out on Richards, and it's just this long row of really white saltine box with no trees, open, like it's kind of stark. And as an environment to live, it does not seem that great. So Georgina mentioned design and architectural styles coming into that, and I think it is important. And I think we could do a lot more with the design of things to increase the impact of creating housing, but decrease the impact to the surrounding area.
I think the same is true for single family homes. I'm currently living on the corner of Cowell and Mace, and my bike along Cowell involves passing by blocks and blocks of pretty much all I'm looking at is garage doors. I'd argue that that is significantly uglier than even, you know, just a large plain apartment complex, and it goes on for so much longer. And so we often talk about the look of apartment complexes, but we're ignoring the fact that a significant portion of our single family homes in Davis are pretty ugly from the street.
Yeah, I think that's one of these weird things, that unintended consequences of the car-centric culture is that everything's designed around the car, including where we live. And so the garage is out front.
Absolutely.
And
so let's put people closer to where they want to actually be so that they don't need a car.
Mm-hmm.
So that we don't have to build everything around a vehicle. Or
put things they need closer to where they are, both.
So that kind of leads into my second question, which is, you know, where should we put housing that we need? Because, you know, it sounds good to say, well, we need to, you know, put all the housing in close, but how are you going to accomplish that in a town that's already kind of configured that way?
Sure, I'd be happy to jump in here. One of the biggest things, arguably the most progressive housing policy, is taking place 20 miles down the road from Davis. It's Sacramento. Sacramento recently is studying along the process to reform their city zoning to allow up to 4 units on a single family lot. Then they're also doing other things such as eliminating parking minimums so that when you build a new building, you're not required to build a ton of parking. It's allowing more density by right, meaning you don't have to go through the extensive public hearing process that causes a lot of community discussion, to say the least. When it comes to what this can actually look like, is you can densify the parts of Davis without having to build only large student-oriented apartment complexes. Because if your process for approval, say you have a single family home, you want to convert this to a duplex, go right ahead as long as you check all the boxes. And you don't have to go to a planning commission. You don't have to go around there. And so if you make it legal to build more housing and legal to build small amounts more housing, we could have actually begun alleviating this crisis, because it's, to be frank, no construction over 20 years and, a few student-oriented apartment complexes is not going to solve the problem overnight. But if we start allowing small increases in density by right, meaning it doesn't have to be these large issues, then you can actually have a dense area of Davis. And to be honest, build it next to campus. There you go.
So I would agree with that. I think that is a very as you said, very progressive move by Sacramento. And when we start talking about like adding more ADUs or densifying our neighborhoods, it's a great idea until people start complaining about the parking and the density in the neighborhoods. And so we've already seen that on Miller Drive when people were, trying to densify in that area. We had to step in and slow that down because it was right next to campus and people saw the opportunity of being able to, provide student housing and densifying that area, which was really ideal. It was right next to downtown. It was right across the street from the university, but it definitely changed the the character of that neighborhood, and people were really worried about that. So in everything that you do have to think about what the ramifications are going to be and where is the best place to make those types of changes. And we talked about how things look. That's really important, but it's really important for where in the neighborhood it's going to be. There was the building that was put up on B Street. I can't remember who built it, but the neighbors hated that because it was so modern looking and it didn't fit in with the character of the neighborhood. But I was driving past it with my son the other day and he was like, wow, that's a really neat building. I really like the way that looks. And I said, oh, talk to the neighbors because they hate that. They hate that building. And so there will always be some places that people don't agree. But I do think that we can come forward and bring things that are going to work.
Go ahead, Kelsey.
I have a couple comments. One, I agree that everyone has different preferences about what looks nice. And so perhaps we should stop letting people complaining about how things look just stop progress, right? We have this situation where there's so much inertia to change nothing ever. And there are people complaining about the lack of change, and there are people complaining about the change. And the people who complain about the change win out because of this inertia over and over. As for parking, there are simple solutions to that issue. You label it with a letter, you give the permits to the people who currently live in those spots, and then you've created a market for that parking where they can sell their permit for however much they want, so that they can make money by selling their parking if they don't need it. And you can, you've created an incentive for them, or you've created a situation where they get the parking. So it's all good. Right. There's not, we don't need to be so afraid of progress in one specific direction towards moving people to where they want to live, because there are, it was brought up that, yeah, the university is full of staff as well. And I don't know any staff member who can afford to live in Davis. Professors, sure. Staff members, no. I don't know
I'll
any
just bring-
staff who live in Davis.
Yeah, it's
They all
about
live
10. Mhm. I was just going to say real briefly, it's about 10,000 staff and faculty that live outside of Davis now, according to the transportation survey.
Yeah, absolutely. For some professors, it's because, their partner works in the, like for some people, it's because their partner works in the Bay or in Sacramento. And so it makes more sense to live next to the person who needs to actually be at their physical place of work every day. But yeah, for staff, it's not a choice that they're making between Davis and living somewhere else. It's that they can't afford to live here.
So I'll jump in with a few thoughts too. One of the things I think we have to decide as a community is, are we going to do infill, keep our footprint the way it is, and try and figure it out within that footprint, or are we going to grow out, as in add more, land to the footprint that we already have? We just had a vote on DISC, and clearly there's a large part of the community that feels that we should hold our footprint the way the city is right now. So if that's the case, then we have to get really strategic about how we're going to build in this community. And I'll throw out a few ideas. Parks and open space are pieces that I think need to be considered. Not every park is utilized. Not every park is utilized for kids playing and just kind of enjoyment and all the reasons that we put parks in. I can think of one very large park that I never see anybody in to speak of, and that's at the entrance of Wild Horse. Maybe a consideration there is housing. There's also land that's contiguous with the city. So I think that's going to be a more popular play if it's not within our boundary right now, but it's contiguous with the city. And that would be something like the actual ranch that's next to Wild Horse. That's been sitting for a long time. It would be something where the city might actually have to approach the landowner and talk to them and engage them somehow, but that's another opportunity. I think, Dawn, you talked about rezoning, single family. I think there's some problems with, taking away single family zoning. But I think it is real viable. I think the thing you have to be careful about is there tends to be a rezoning in neighborhoods that are already affordable, older neighborhoods, because that's the land that's going to be the most affordable. And so what happens is you end up disenfranchising the people that are in those areas, and you get a kind of a gentrification process. So you got to be careful with that too. But I do think it's a good idea that needs to be floated. We talked about the ADUs. It's not the silver bullet, but it's a part of the process. I think the land within the Mace Curve instead of on the outside of the Mace Curve is something to consider. Also, I drove through Wild Horse the other day. There are what they call view corridors in between single family homes that could be built on. Not that there is a ton of them, but there's enough to put in some infill housing in some of those areas. So we have land space within the community. It means giving up some things, perhaps park, open space. But again, if we're not going to build out and we have to build more and we want to include people, something's got to give. You don't get everything without giving something, So that would be the other comment I would make. And then I think too, there is actually a lot of commercial space on the south side of Davis, south side of the freeway. I happen to live over there. That there could be consideration for rezoning there as well. And some really nice areas where you could have that work where you live experience, because there's a lot of commercial space there that's being utilized by the university, Sierra Energy, and other, employers, if you will, businesses. So we do have opportunity in this town to build, but there needs to be some engagement on it, some thought, and obviously change.
So actually,
go ahead.
That's a perfect segue. I mean, so one of the issues that I've had personally and seen, and I think the University Mall development was a classic example of this, is that there isn't, all due respect to our mayor, because one of the panelists, there does not seem to be, for at least from my perspective, great engagement with the city developers and neighborhoods. So when a project comes through, like there's no real honest attempt to come up with a solution with all the stakeholders. This is an opinion, but I think it's a pretty valid opinion, but who doesn't think their opinions are valid? So the University Mall, like a big development in my neighborhood, is the issue was mass and scale. There were also issues of traffic and people, but the biggest issue was mass and scale. And that was a design problem. And getting the developers into the room with the neighbors and coming up with a solution seems like a really good way to go forward. So in my neighborhood, we had a development that we didn't like. We put forward a proposal and got no traction with the city, but we put forward a proposal. So there are people out there who are not, we get this, it's our cultural thing. It's a US culture. If you are not absolutely in favor of something, you're absolutely against it. And that, we really need to get over that, in my opinion. So Don, I think I remember where I did meet you, and it was R1 zoning question. But so again, in my neighborhood, I may emphasize a lot, I love my neighborhood. We've got multiplexes, single family homes, historic homes, apartment buildings, businesses. It's walkable, it's bikeable, it's dense. And the reason it works, and it's still a nice neighborhood that people actually come from other neighborhoods to walk their dog in. They also come to drop their beer bottles, but that's a different story, is because it works and one function does not overwhelm the other functions. Everything works together because it works together. I guess I'll stop.
So I agree that you've got a lovely neighborhood over there. And it is, you do have to preserve some of the character and the charm of our city. I think that those are important things. It's also really expensive. And I think that I love that Georgina mentioned the, not disenfranchising people when you're trying to make things better. I think that's it's a really important piece to keep in mind. I've had some conversations recently with people at Rancho Yolo, and they're really concerned about, senior housing, for instance, and the increases in rents go up faster than the increases in fixed income. And so, making sure that we keep some spaces that are going to remain affordable it is a really important thing. And I agree on the, buy-in from neighbors when there are projects and developers come through. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I mean, when a project comes through and the developer goes out and says, this is what we want to do, very rarely are neighbors on board. And I know that the thing that always comes back is that, it's not going to pencil if it's too small. We have that problem with Pacifico. We put out an RFP and we didn't have a whole lot of people that came back because they said, we can't build and make it pencil out. And the only thing that was going to pencil out was something that was too big, and the neighbors didn't want something that was too big there. I was just in a meeting with Yolo County Housing, and they have a piece of property that they want to build affordable units on, for sale units. And they, have this proposal for a certain number and a certain scale, and it doesn't work. It just doesn't work. And this is people who are not trying to make a profit. They're just trying to build something that's affordable and sell it to people. And so they had to, change the number of units and the size of what they were building. We live in a place where construction is incredibly expensive, and the fees and all of that add up to make projects really, really expensive in California. I mean, there's why is it that everything in California is so expensive, and you can go somewhere else in another state and get property that is much less? I think that is a problem that is going to have to be worked on by our legislature, right? So they're going to have to really look at ways to, to make the cost of building less expensive in California, because companies are leaving California because, not only is it more expensive to do business here, but it's more expensive to house their workers here. And so it's something that we all will have to work on together.
So let me segue that into my last question, and then there are a lot of really good questions from the audience. How do we get affordable housing? Because one of the problems in the post-RDA world is you pretty much have to attach affordable housing to market rate housing, and we already identified how difficult that's going to be. Let me start with Georgina on this question. How do we get more affordable housing? How are we going to be able to build 900 units of affordable housing over the next 8 years?
Well, that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? I'll start what I'm going to offer up with a quote, and I don't remember who did the quote, but it's, if you want to change people's behavior, you have to encourage a specific behavior, and you have to incentivize it, okay? That's how you can encourage people to change their behavior. And if the behavior we want to change here is to build housing, we're going to have to incentivize that somehow, all right? And if ADUs is one of the solutions that we're looking at, and we know that ADUs right now are renting at unaffordable rates. They're renting at market. And we feel that we need to help people, the AMIs, the median incomes. Then maybe what we need to do is incentivize the owner that's building that ADU by deferring fees. So if they will rent their property to somebody that hits the AMI, okay, that is, in need of, all right, program qualified for affordable housing, in other words. So that means the city needs to participate. Oh, and the homeowner needs to participate. So I think the solution in some of these things is that we have to, all of us, look at what can we do to help solve the problem. It is a land use problem. It is a government problem. It is a community problem. So it's the builder's problem too. We all have to participate in solving it, and it's going to come out of all of our pockets. I think the other piece I would say is, and it's been echoed, I'm echoing what the rest of you have mentioned, and that is, it is community involvement. And if you want to get people to help solve the problem, you have to involve them in finding the solutions and the conversation. Is it hard to do? Of course it is. Anything that's important and real and needed is difficult. None of this is going to be easy to solve. And it is especially hard, costs money and time to get the community members together to actually talk about things. The other piece I would say, and now I'm going to get on my personal bandwagon, and that is I have been pushing something called the Housing Trust Fund, which we as a city have already, okay? Our commission, our Social Services Commission, and the Housing Element Committee have voted in affirmation of this document. And basically what it is we said, look, housing is an issue. It's a continuum. There is a problem with homelessness. There's a problem with people that are trying to rent, and there's a problem with people trying to get into and buy a home in Davis. So that's the continuum. How do we set priorities for each of these categories of housing needs? And that's what our commission felt was really an important thing to do. And, like right now, how we're solving some of the housing issues for homelessness is through the COVID grants that are coming in from the government. That's not going to be there forever. We need, as a city, to start really actualizing a sustainable program, okay? A sustainable way of helping people that are homeless, helping people that are at risk of losing a rental property, and helping people get into the market. And, you know, whether it's down payment assistance for somebody trying to get into the market, or paying somebody's utility bills that's a renter and can't afford to keep up the utility bills right now because they're not making enough money or they've lost their job, or that homeless person on the street that lost their housing, okay? How do we help all these people? We've tried to create some priorities in each of those categories in our draft, our Housing Trust Fund draft. And we've also said, look, you know, whether it's in lieu fees, increasing those to have more money going into the Housing Trust Fund. Right now we're getting $75,000. That's nothing. That is absolutely nothing. Increasing in lieu fees, whether it's putting a tax on current homeowners. So when there's a transfer or a sale of some kind, that there's some money from that sale that goes into the Housing Trust Fund. Another opportunity, you know, we've presented various mechanisms, private fundraising to go into the Housing Trust Fund to help solve some of these problems. Again, not a silver bullet, but if we don't start creating actual priorities and finding ways to sustain programs for those priorities, then, you know, I would say that we really don't care about people that are homeless, and we don't really care about people that, you know, whether they can afford a rental in town or not, and we really don't care about somebody, young person, a senior, whoever it is that's trying to buy something in this community. So, all right, I'll get off my bandwagon.
Go ahead, Larry.
So on the affordable thing, one of the ways you can do it is you require it and enforce the requirements. The biggest cost of a development or redevelopment is the land. And that is not a fixed cost, right? Value is what is potential. And if you know what can be done to a given piece of property, that determines its value. It does not go the other way. So if, however, you can throw something out there and make it work, then the land becomes more valuable because of speculation. So that is one way, is to actually require the affordable things and stick to those requirements. Another way to do it is, and there is removing density requirements. Talked about parking requirements and stuff, but in the downtown plan, there was a lot of discussion, and I tried to bring it up. It didn't really go anywhere, but about giving bonuses for micro units. But what about something that's not a micro unit, but not a 1,700 square foot single bedroom apartment, right? So from a property owner's perspective, you can get more money in rent from 3 500 square foot apartments than you can for a 1,500 square foot apartment. It makes the units more affordable. It puts more of them out there, right? So just adding that to huge buildings is not what I'm talking about, but it's a way to do it. Another way to do it is when an innovation comes along, look at it, really vet it, and check it out. So I noticed Chuck Cunningham's on the panelist list, and his project in South Davis, they went another way around it altogether, and they were like, you're asking for this huge chunk of money, and maybe he can correct me if I'm wrong, up front, and we can't do that because we got to have a huge chunk of money buying the land and building a building. So what about paying over time into the city's trust fund? And that worked out, and they made it work in a totally non-affiliated person in Davis ran the numbers, and like the city wins on that. It's a better deal for the city than the in lieu fees. Another thing that you can do for affordable housing, and I think several people have mentioned, I think Georgina mentioned, is don't remove affordable housing. So that's one of the big issues with gentrification, is tearing down cheap apartments to put in expensive apartments. And then, yeah, anyway, I think that was it. Thanks.
Let's let Kelsey jump in here. I do want to note that, you know, I think Larry was kind of referring to the missing middle, which maybe somebody can address at some point. But Kelsey, jump in, please.
Yeah. So I think, you know, this idea of tearing down what is currently cheap being a bad thing is not always the case. Much of the more affordable units in Davis are that way because they are literally falling apart. Actually falling apart. And the property owners don't have to do anything because those will rent regardless.
I
All
wasn't
right, so
trying to make a blanket statement about don't ever tear anything cheap down. I'm just saying, you know.
Right, but the reason things are cheap in Davis is majority because it's falling apart. And that's because our vacancy rate is so low. We have to get on this problem and we have to do it quickly because there are all of these people, these, you know, thousands of people who want to live in Davis. And that's not going to go away if we build 900 affordable units in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I actually really want to add upon, you know, we talk about affordable as capital A, and getting capital A units are great, but the amount of people who actually qualify for the units outstrips demand almost by, I think, every 10 people, only 2 can get them on average.
Yep.
There's year-long waiting lists. So we have to focus on small A, and you do that primarily through supply. We need more supply, and that's how you actually bring that affordability down. And then it's making housing easy to approve and easy to get built, because if a developer has to not only go through the entire development process and then spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to convince 51% of Davis voters to approve a project, that's another massive cost. You know, it's probably around I've worked on a lot of political campaigns. You know, these projects in Davis for the political side cost anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 to get your message across. Well, that's multiple years of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, just as Georgina cited.
We call this, oh, sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we
Go
have
ahead.
a name for this in economics, right? We have this multiple marginalization problem where you are taking this issue that's, I mean, it is expensive to build housing. I'm not going to disagree with that. California is an expensive place to build things. But it's not only expensive because the inputs are expensive, it's expensive because we have all of these processes that you have to go through. And we have all of these people that you have to convince. And we have all of these extra things that make it unreasonable, that make it not worth it. And so things like the downtown plan, where you have a situation where you're going to be able to say, okay, this property is currently, you know, an empty commercial building, but you could tear that down and build something, you know, that has both commercial space and, you know, housing on top of it. That sort of opportunity without having to go through 100 different steps, that's going to increase the amount of development that we see in Davis. And I know that that's going to be hard, right? These changes from one system to another means there's going to be growing pains. And so when I think about the downtown plan, for example, I think that, you know, the downtown is going to have, you know, lots of construction happening for probably a decade. And, you know, many of the people who are living in that area currently may not see the, you know, the benefits at the end of this transition period to when we get to a new steady state. but we have to be willing to make that sacrifice to get to a new normal that's a more healthy place, because the place that we're in now isn't.
So I want to jump in because we have a ton of good audience questions that I want to try to get through, at least most of them. And we're also going to create a list, and I'll figure out what I want to do with that list at the end of the day. But Lynchy, you want to read off the first one?
So David, can I just really quickly, I just wanted to chime in on the affordable housing, or the, how do we get to affordable housing? I think that the trust fund is a really good idea, because I think we need to help in not, so a couple of ideas is I'd really like to see us be able to help people with down payments and get people into housing. I'd like to see if we could somehow supplement the voucher program, because I think vouchers is a really good way to get people into housing without having to build, big A or little a of affordable types of housing, which are really difficult to do. And I've, been having conversations with developers and nonprofits about why don't the developers and nonprofits work together, since the redevelopment money has gone away, but nonprofits can raise some money to put into developments and do some projects together. And one person that I talked to said that is actually a thing, like in other states, where nonprofits will, put money into and get together with for-profit developers and do some mixed, pricing in an apartment building. But it doesn't happen here because they, can go somewhere else. There's not the pressure to do it. There's, if you can't build affordable in Davis, or you can't build a project in Davis, you're going to go to Dixon, you're going to go to Sacramento. If, Davis is asking for certain things, they just won't build it here. They'll build it somewhere else, and they can build the affordable units that are being asked for in another city. And I think that we're losing out on being able to house people.
All right, Lynchy.
Yeah, so one of the first interesting questions that we got is from Juliet Beck. She asked, are there plans to build more co-housing in Davis? How can we incentivize and support more cooperative ownership of housing? Yeah, Larry?
That's actually something that I like, that model. Dos Pinos and limited equity housing, I think, is a good way to actually get something affordable, especially in the longer term. I will say on cost that so 5 to 7 years ago, the city reduced its fees, and they've been static for the last at least 5 years. And we talk about material costs going up, but rents have gone up far, far faster. So that kind of, and the other thing about the cost is, I'm an evidence-based guy. I got a master's degree in science. And so I have never yet seen the evidence of it doesn't pencil out, even when it doesn't pencil out. And then, well, actually something smaller did pencil out because you wouldn't let us build something bigger. So, I mean, yeah, if we're going to change city law to accommodate doesn't pencil out, then I want to actually see that it doesn't pencil out. That's what I would like to see personally. But I'm sorry, and Lynchy, what was the question again? I've read.
Co-housing.
Co-housing, yeah. So Dos Pinos, limited equity, co-housing. As far as I know, so like N Street Co-op and that kind of thing, Sunrise Co-op, those things, those were not instigated by the city, right? They were, to my knowledge, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but they were instigated by a bunch of people just got together. And, it's one of my, innovation comes from the community, not from City Hall typically. And that's a big part of it. I mean, N Street made it work, and it's a good example. And it's a good example of using a lot of different tools to solve a problem.
So I think co-housing is another, I'll say, tool in the tool chest to help people with housing. It's not for everybody, it's generally a higher density type of housing, and you do need a group of people to work together to actually come up with the plan for what the co-housing project would look like. You need the land space to do it in, so there needs to be the money to buy the land to do it with. And part of the challenge with it too is it's not, how do I want to say, banks generally, when you go to a bank, they get a little nervous about investing in co-housing. It's not as typical as, say, you go buy a house and the lender's doing an appraisal and a loan for you buying your house. It's the lender's doing an appraisal on a larger project that's owned and obligated by a lot of different people. And it's just a more complex process. So that's why you really need a very, I'll say, united and common interest group of people to make it happen. One of the first ones that happened in Davis is called Mutual Housing. It's over right on the border of Aspen, if people remember that neighborhood in West Davis. And Charles Durrett, who is an architect, lives up in Nevada City, was the architect for that. And that group of people really formed the idea. But yeah, co-housing is certainly one of the tools.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So this one is by Joe Bolt. I think it's a clarification question to one of the discussion we had. He asked, why do we want to decrease impacts to the community, in quote, don't we need big positive change to combat climate change and social injustice?
I really want to jump in here because Davis is one of the highest opportunity cities in our entire region. I wrote a piece in the Vanguard a few weeks ago, if you hadn't a chance to read it, but it is about affirmatively furthering fair housing law. Now, what this means is that you want to build housing in places where it's good for somebody to grow up in. The best predictor for where somebody has positive life outcomes is if they're in a place that is a good, healthy, vibrant place to live. Schools, access to jobs, housing, and also minimal pollution. 90% of Davis is identified as high opportunity. And if we care about overcoming our systematic racial and social injustices, it's making sure people from backgrounds that do not have access to quality housing have that in places just like Davis. Now, Davis actually has the lowest relative RHNA assignment for its peer cities. So Davis is around 2,000 units, which is about 3% of the population. Compare that to Woodland, which is around 3,000 units, which is 5% of the population, and West Sacramento that has 9,000 units, or 19%. And those cities score far lower on high opportunity. I think Woodland's around 12 and West Sac's around 40%. So if you care about overcoming a lot of our systematic inequalities, making sure people can live in a place like Davis, where they have good schools, jobs, a good environment, and that means changing the community character. And so I get really frustrated when people talk a lot about community character because there's a growing homelessness crisis. I have a colleague in North Davis Farms, the wealthiest community in town, had a homeless encampment at least a couple of years ago. I'm not sure if it's still there. There are growing things. And so if you don't manage the change and you don't want to welcome new neighbors in, which is a lot of the policies that make it hard to build housing lead to, you just have Davis furthering the systematic inequalities we have, because Davis, when you factor out the students, is actually one of the least diverse cities in the entire region.
I wish I had the little like celebration reaction thing I could put up right now, but I can't find it. Yes, I read over the summer, I read Evicted, which I highly recommend to everyone. It's a great book. And they absolutely talk about, the quality of life and the opportunities that you have as a child can make such a difference in lifting people out of poverty. And I, experienced this firsthand when I came to Davis, because I came from an underserved area, and my kids had a completely different experience growing up here than I had. And one of the things that they talk about in this book again is the voucher system. Is being, if you can get, you know, people to move out of areas that are you know, low opportunity and into places like Davis, you can change an entire generation. You can change generations of people. And it is what I think about all the time when we sort of get, you know, muddled into conversations about, you know, character and building height and things like that. And those are important. I'm not dismissing, you know, the changing the quality of life for everyone that is here. But I think that there is a way to do both. I think that we can absolutely, you know, give opportunity to people and maintain the quality of life that we already have. But we're going to have to get there. We're going to have to, you know, maybe make some decisions that are not in, you know, that everyone is happy with, and that maybe, you know, are going to be difficult, but we have to make those decisions. We have to start thinking about all the different ways that we can make things better for people.
I agree with you, Gloria, but I think people do want to solve problems. And I think if you have a problem or a solution dropped in your lap, you're less likely to embrace that than if you had a hand in solving that problem. And I think we talk about, there's a lot in the chat about hyper-local participation. I'm not sure what that is. But if the people who are going to feel the effects are engaged in solving the problem, I totally agree with you that we can solve both problems. We can do win-win. It can happen. Things don't have to be forced on people.
Well, I think the best you're going to get is to win, almost win, actually.
I disagree. I've had win-win all the time. It took work, but it actually takes a lot less work than other things. Like, it takes less work than waiting 2 years for a second election for a Measure J vote. Just as one example.
Yeah, so Larry, I'm glad you brought up the hyperlocal participation, because that could lead to our next question from Brett Stevens. So he asked, how do we deal with the problem of hyperlocal participation? And to clarify, whenever new developments are proposed, the neighbors who currently live in the neighborhood are given a much louder voice than the people who could become neighbors with construction of the new housing.
I guess I would say, how do you reach out to people that could become neighbors? But there's an interesting thing, is that everybody talks about democracy being a participation sport, but if you participate, unless you just say yes, apparently, then you are, you know, you're just a loudmouth in your hyper local participation. So again, I'm gonna engagement, engage people in solving the problem, and they will help you solve the problem.
So I guess, Larry, you live in a neighborhood that has a fairly active neighborhood association, and not everyone is so lucky to have, you know, this formal way to engage with their community. And I think that, you know, that perhaps that's something that, you know, we need to create so that we can have these conversations and actually make them more useful and more inclusive. Because, you know, one of the things that we see, especially when it comes to public comment in a city council meeting, is that the voices that we're hearing are those that actually have the time and energy to pay attention to these types of things. And there are a lot of people who live in Davis who don't have that, and who are also who also may have a very different view on these types of things. They differ in many ways from the more vocal neighbors of say a potential development. And so I think that, you know, perhaps when we're considering, you know, engaging with neighborhoods, we need to look a little bit further.
Absolutely. I like
know,
engagement.
Well, actually,
right,
I want to jump in here, and actually, I really want to highlight, if you have a really extended public hearing process, it can really kill projects and actually lead to the projects to be slower and less big overall. We are in a massive housing shortage. I think that's really not being emphasized enough in this conversation. We need every unit possible. Growing homelessness crisis, growing affordability crisis, more and more people living on the edge. And each of those projects that don't get built don't have that portion of in lieu fees or inclusive affordable that takes place. And so if you have to have a project, let's JRD, 2 projects approved, 6 proposed, 0 units built, 0 units over 20 years. Any of those community benefits like the affordable housing, which publicly everybody says they're supportive of, but oftentimes they're not. And I just have to make a point of this. There is a lot of terrible voices that do kind of come out in public comment. You know, at the university mall project, full disclosure, I was part of their outreach team, just so you know. You know, there were some people that said some pretty terrible things. And if you replace student with any other term or protected class, you know, would sound a lot worse. And I've heard this over my entire course doing housing politics in Davis. About a decade ago, a friend of mine, my roommate, was actually knocking on doors to support the Wild Horse Ranch project, and a local Davis columnist insinuated that she was just in it for the money and using her sex appeal. And then, you know, you see these things, which kind of just makes a really harsh atmosphere sometimes. And so when somebody has the opportunity to spend 2 to 3 hours to go to city council, before we did virtual, and props to council and mayor for going virtual, because I think it's actually a lot more inclusive, the amount of time and energy. And then for example, if there's going to be 1,000 new people in a place, they don't live there in the neighborhood, so they don't realize that could be them. And that's one of the crux of the problems when it comes to student mobilization. And reason why I've been involved is your average student is here for 3 to 5 years. They don't really know about the city politics, and why should they for an average person? So those are kind of some of the systematic issues you have that kind of, you know, frustrate me in these conversations.
Well,
I just want to jump in as well. So I absolutely believe in community engagement, and it does slow the process down. And you have to like find a place where you are going to get the community engagement, but you're not going to kill projects. And I think that is an important thing, and it is very hard to do. And you know, Larry says, you know, that you know, you can have win-win. And the reason that I say you can have almost win, is that even in the projects where, you know, people will say, well, you know, there was community outreach, I was happy with it. You're going to find people who were not happy with it. It doesn't matter which project goes forward. It's very subjective as to like who is happy with a project. You can have, you know, maybe the people who have the most agency and who are the most vocal will say, yeah, you know, I'm okay, now you have satisfied me and I am happy with this project. That doesn't mean that everyone in the community is happy with that project or satisfied with that project. And so I just feel like you have to, that there will always be people who are unhappy. There will always be, you know, some dissatisfaction. And as Don mentioned, in the process, there are needs that are going unmet. And I think we have to meet those needs.
So
I agree, but I would
that's a great
go
point,
ahead.
Gloria. I think one of the things that I'll kind of come back to is the housing element. Part of the reason for doing a housing element is to get community buy-in and to get community input, okay? So that's where you're getting some of that. What do people want? What are the priorities of the community? Laying out a plan. And then when people are dissenting, we're always going to have dissent. Not everybody's going to agree on everything. That's just never going to happen. So, but when you have dissent, at least you can point to the housing element. This was our plan. Maybe housing trust fund, I'll hit that too. Here are our priorities. And we're hitting those things. We're achieving, you know, what we've set as priorities for a community. We're achieving what we created as a plan and the housing element. That's how I think you as a council person, mayor, can have more confidence in the decisions you're making on city council, because you know you've got community buy-in. Not everybody, but you've got some community buy-in. And
I agree. I agree. Absolutely.
The other piece, thank you. I think the other piece is, I'll call it the elephant in town, and that is, you know, I love UC Davis, okay? We wouldn't be here if it weren't for UC Davis, quite frankly. None of us would be having this conversation, because UC Davis is good and it's challenging for us. They happen to have more land space than we do. Yes, they're building student housing, hoorah, but they could be building for sale housing for faculty and staff. The only project that they have on UC Davis campus, or part of campus, as we all know, is Aggie Village. All right. Well, I've seen in the comments, Stanford, other university campuses, a lot of university campuses have faculty housing on campus for sale housing because of the very issues that we're talking about. And they hit those issues of, you know, cost of living and expensive housing, and how do we get faculty here if we don't have a place for them to live. So, you know, there's been a tremendous change in the city of Davis's engagement with UC Davis. I applaud that. We finally have a memorandum of understanding with the university. Well, I think this is the next iteration. So I put that out there too.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment that it's not faculty who can't afford to live in Davis.
Yeah, actually it is.
Right.
See, I have some clients that are faculty and they can't afford to live in Davis.
It's primarily the staff, though. Many of the faculty who don't live in Davis are doing so by choice.
I have clients.
Right, faculty
I
is a very
dispute
small
that
number.
comment.
Okay, faculty is a very small number relative to staff, and it's really staff that's being driven out.
So I'd like to comment on there's a narrative that engagement takes more time. And I don't agree with the narrative. And it's been mentioned in the chat a couple times. Lincoln 40 is actually a great example. Lincoln 40, not the city, the people, the developers came to our neighborhood and said, we've got this plan. We want to build this thing. What are your issues? They legitimately and honestly sat down, heard us out. They actually changed the project to try and mitigate some of the stuff we had. So we've had a lot. And so people say, Old East Davis doesn't like change. Well, it's constantly changing. And the places that change are people that have come to us and said, hey, let's work it out. Okay, work it out. Those things are built. They're built. Another thing is, and this didn't get part of this discussion, and it's probably a red herring at this point. It's a whole new webinar, Dave, hint, hint. But with the UC, as people have mentioned, or at least insinuated, is driving the population of Davis. So in my view, until the city and the UC have a combined long-range development plan, the plans aren't that useful, which is why we have the situation we have now in both the numbers problem, the rental problem, and everything's a plan development.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you meant by that, Larry.
Meant by?
Your statement just now, until they have
until the city, so the city has a plan, a general plan, and the university has a long-range development plan. and they don't talk to each other, right? They're different plans, but we're more than tied at the hip. We are together. We are one community. And we can put the growth numbers on we can do what we want, but if there's all this pressure from outside, and there's other pressure too, not just the university, but the Bay Area, right? The cannery, a lot of those units, which were supposed to help the housing problem, helped the Bay Area housing problem. So, I mean, yeah, without the UC and the city of Davis having a combined development plan, I don't know how effective a general plan is.
So I think that was part of what the MOU between the city and the university addressed, was the number of students that the university was going to be increasing and meeting that housing that for their students. And I agree that that the university should probably build some houses. I think there was a plan for that and has been halted. But the one thing that I do worry a little bit about is that at some point there will be restaurants and coffee shops and grocery stores on the UC Davis campus, and that for some people that's great. Okay, keep all those people over there in that little kind of pseudo village. But that's bad for us, where we want people to come to our restaurants, and our grocery stores, and our coffee shops.
Why does it have to be so adversarial though, right? Like, you can have a locally owned coffee shop on the UC Davis campus, hopefully, right? Like, I'm assuming that the university.
No taxes from that. We get no taxes from that.
Okay, but that's not the goal.
And
the goal, right? Like
and there are very few people who only stay on campus. I mean, come on, right? Like, nobody just stays on campus. People go out into the community, they go downtown. And that's the thing, you go downtown, there's a lot of students downtown, which is why a lot of the businesses cater to students.
Absolutely. And people are not happy with that sometimes, right? That's something that I hear complaints about, that our downtown actually caters too much to students, and that people have to go to Sacramento to get what they're looking for.
Businesses cater to clients. If you want it to cater to you, go down and spend your money there. That's my thing. And that's what I do.
Okay, thank you, everyone. It looks like we had a lot of good input for this question. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next. So this one kind of shifts away from the previous topic, but Leslie Hunter wants to know, what's the status of the U Mall development now? She also mentioned that it's CC approved, but is the development going through?
As far as I guess she's wondering, like, when will it start to get built? Is that, I'm not really sure what the question is.
I think the question is it being built? Is that the plan?
Yeah.
Well, it has been approved. I know it's got to come back and go through Planning Commission again. And so there's still some steps before they actually start putting buildings up.
Great. Yeah, so I think that's the question, is, were there more steps with the city, or is it just like it's going to happen? I'd like to point out that the issues that neighbors have had with the scale of this and the potential parking issues, those all have simple solutions. And so I don't see why we can't make those things happen. One of the things I think is very strange in Davis is that there's no underground parking. And so part of this, there's a significant portion of this that is a parking structure on this lot, and we could just put that parking underneath. I know it's more expensive, but they're going to make money either way. And it's not actually that much more expensive than building a vertical parking structure to put a level underground.
Actually, I think it's a lot more. It's coming from
I've looked at the numbers, Larry. It's not that much more per space.
Until you have to
especially-
mitigate the underground plumes of toxic materials which are throughout Davis. So I was going to say, coming from the geologist perspective, it's
Gotcha.
a lot.
Yeah, that's definitely my understanding, is that it's always been cost prohibitive to do underground parking. Every so often we've gotten lucky and gotten a few buildings approved with actual underground parking, but that has not been the norm here in town. So I think we're closing in on the end here. This has been a good discussion. It's also a good reminder to me that I feel like we barely scratched the surface of these issues in an hour and a half, which I think illustrates the enormity of the subject matter. But you know, I'm a big believer. You know, it's hard for me to bite my tongue sometimes on these comments, but you know, one of the things that I think is really important is that you know, we view these webinars as a public engagement process, and that we need to be doing more of this stuff. And I know, you know, organizations like the League of Women Voters have done some really good public engagement over the last couple of years, and so I would hope that they can also pick up this issue in the future, because I think it just needs a lot more discussion in this community. You know, there are lots of different community needs. There are lots of different community views on housing, and everybody comes at this from a very different perspective. And you know, I really don't believe that there's a right and wrong answer here. I believe that everybody has a different idea and perspective to offer, which is why we need kind of more of this. So maybe each person take only 60 seconds, but kind of your takeaway from this discussion. Let's see, Don, you want to start?
Sure. In the next few weeks, we'll be seeing the draft report of the Davis housing element, and we'll hopefully see some proposals that can actually incorporate a lot of the ways to actually build more housing supply. Because by 2050, is Davis going to continue to grow up, or is it going to grow out? But if it doesn't grow, we'll just see a continued rise in housing inaffordability, more people commuting on 80 like myself, and then one of the cities that's the most high opportunity and not worried about wildfires or floods, unlike other places when climate change is going to hitting. We'll see if Davis is on the right track to be a progressive city around housing issues, in my opinion.
Georgina?
Wow. I guess where I would, you know, kind of offer my thoughts on all this is, you know, housing is complex. All right. And, you know, as typified by all the conversation here and the questions coming in, I've been, you know, working at this, I guess, if you will, through the Social Services Commission and through the League of Women Voters and various other avenues for, I don't know, the past 5 or 6 years since I've come back to Davis. And, you know, I continue to hear that people are concerned and they want change, but I haven't seen any real change. And that's what really bothers me. I haven't seen any real change in regards to our housing policies. I haven't seen any real change in regards to community engagement to make the change. So I'll just leave it there. So I guess I'll look to the community that, you know, folks, we really need to do something. We've got a lot of people that need help, and it only happens if we apply ourselves and do something.
Larry?
I think Georgina said it pretty well. I mean, and I think part of the narrative going back about engagement taking a long time is maybe because the engagement's not being done in the way that it could be to be more effective and to actually kind of get to a solution. Also getting back to the, you know, people who don't have the time, young families. How many young family people do you see at city council making public comment? Not very many, because they don't have time. They just drive to Woodland and Dixon and buy their houses. So I think they're very much a silent majority. And I mean, I don't think people are not addressing them or thinking about them, but they are not vocal because they're busy. And so they need to be factored in as well. And of course, working people.
Kelsey?
I'd like to bring this back to the impacts that we have on the world around us, impacts on the neighboring communities, which are seeing people using them as a place to live, but then they work here, and so they don't have the time to create community that people deserve. I'd like to bring it back to the world around us, as in our climate change problems, and how we need people to get out of their cars. We need people to be living where they work and where they play. This is not a choice that we have at this point. We have to make a change, and it has to be big, and it's not, as has been said, it's not going to be easy.
All right, Gloria, you get the last word.
Oh, did you cut off Kelsey? Did you have one more thing?
I'm sorry, Kelsey.
All good. If it's worth doing, it's going to be hard.
So I am looking forward to our housing element process, you know, working through that. You know, Larry mentioned that if we engage the community, they will help us fix this problem. And this is that moment. This is the moment where the community can come forward and help us fix this problem. And so get out there and get engaged. This is the time to be engaged in our process. Everything is on Zoom now. So that has really lifted a lot of barriers for people to be engaged. You can get on the website and you can, you know, get your comments in. I am looking forward to that. I'm looking forward to hear, as Georgina mentioned, where the priorities are for the community, because I'm willing to follow what those priorities are for the community. But also I'm, you know, wanting to make sure that the top priority is getting people housed, because that really is where we need to be. We need to be in a place where people can be housed in this area where families can prosper. And we don't have a whole lot of families right now who are able to take advantage of all of the opportunities that we have. And then yeah, I think that is what's most important to me, is getting people housed. And I'd also like to mention that Ellen Miller has the most interesting conversations going there in the chat.
Well, and David, I just sent off to you the housing element. We should remind everybody that's our audience here to participate in the housing element via the website. So maybe you can share that with everybody. I sent it to you. Thank you.
If I can do that before time runs out. So here is the website for that. Boom. All right. So I want to thank everyone for participating today. And I want to thank the audience for sticking around for an hour and a half and listening to this interesting discussion. As I said a few seconds ago, we really only scratched the surface, and this is really the beginning, I think, of what we need to be discussing in this community, not the end. So yes, be engaged. So thanks, everybody, and have a good one.